Welcome to Infinite Universe with interesting episode. Melissa Gilbert went through many tough and painful experiences before she ever found success.
There are secrets people carry for years. Not because they want to, but because the truth is so heavy, so world-altering, that speaking it out loud would mean watching everything they built come crashing down. Jane Kilcher carried one of those secrets. For years, she smiled for the cameras, showed up to film, and kept a discovery buried so deep that no one around her had any idea. But now, after staying quiet for longer than anyone should have to, Jane is finally telling her story. And once you understand what she went through, you'll realize the silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. July 23, 2023 started like any other summer day on the Kilcher homestead. The Alaskan sun hung high and generous, offering one of those rare stretches of warmth that almost make the brutal winters worth enduring. Jane woke up knowing what she had to do. She reached for her phone and typed the words she had rehearsed in her mind for weeks. Lee is divorcing me, and it is very unfortunate, but I cannot control it. I lost my best friend and it hurts, but I guess that is life. It won't stop me. The moment she posted those words, thousands of reactions flooded in. Shock, disbelief, support. But what almost no one knew was that the announcement barely scratched the surface of what had really happened. To understand the weight of this moment, you need to understand who Jane was before she ever became a Kilcher. Born on September 14, 1974 in Homer, Alaska, Jane was not someone who came from softness. She was a commercial fisherwoman who spent 20-hour days hauling heavy lines and nets on unpredictable waters. She had a daughter, Piper, from her first marriage, and when that relationship ended, she raised her as a single mother without flinching, without slowing down, without asking for anything she hadn't earned herself. Jane was the kind of woman who read the ocean the way other people read faces, instinctively, accurately, without hesitation. When Jane and Atsley reconnected as adults, music was the bridge. Songs shared around a fire, his harmonica and guitar paired with her voice. There was something real there, something that felt like it was built to last. They married on November 7, 2006, in a small ceremony near Homer, and Jane brought everything she had into that life. Her knowledge of the waters, her physical strength, her willingness to work without complaint. She earned her place on that homestead through action, not through title. On screen, their partnership looked unbreakable. Fans watched them face impossible conditions side by side and believed in what they saw. And for a long time, Jane believed in it too. Then came 2015, and the accident that changed everything. Atsley fell in Otter Cove during a hike. He broke 26 bones, punctured both lungs, and came closer to not surviving than anyone wanted to admit. Jane held everything together during that time. The homestead, the kids, his recovery, the filming schedule. She carried it all while the cameras rolled and viewers marveled at her strength. What the cameras didn't capture was what Jane expected to get in return. She had given everything during the hardest season of their marriage. She expected closeness. She expected the kind of bond that only survives something like that to grow stronger. Instead, Atsley pulled away. He started talking about building a cabin deeper in the wilderness, farther from the main homestead, farther from her. He said he needed space to heal. He said he needed to live more authentically. When Jane said she wouldn't move out there with him, he built it anyway. Alone. The show framed this as dramatic tension between two strong personalities. Viewers saw Jane as the reluctant wife hesitant to embrace her husband's vision. What they didn't see was Jane's growing certainty that the cabin had nothing to do with wilderness living. It was about escape. And the more she watched, the more she noticed. His mood shifting without warning. Plans canceled at the last minute. Times when he said he'd be somewhere, but his truck was parked somewhere entirely different. Jane had spent years reading currents and sensing danger on open water. Those same instincts were telling her something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was fall of 2017. Jane was in the kitchen wiping down the counter after a long day of processing fish. Her shoulders were aching. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Atsley had left hours earlier to check on the cabin site. His phone sat on the counter, plugged into the charger. He had forgotten it again. That kept happening. The screen lit up with a notification, a message preview. Jane's hands went still. She stared at the words visible through the lock screen and felt her stomach drop the way it does when you miss a step on a staircase in the dark. She picked up the phone. The passcode was their anniversary. Of course it was. The messages that opened before her eyes were not what a wife expects to find on her husband's phone. Intimate exchanges, long conversations, patterns that made clear this had been happening for months. She read them once, fast, her chest tightening. Then she read them again, slower, hoping she had somehow misunderstood. She hadn't. Jane set the phone down carefully, exactly where she found it. She aligned it with the charger cord. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get it right. She walked out onto the porch and stared at the mountains. The late afternoon light was painting them gold. It was beautiful, the way it always was. She used to love that view. Now, it just looked cold. 17 years, 2 decades of her life poured into that homestead, that family, that man. She had walked away from commercial fishing for him, and she had built her entire identity around being his partner. And standing there on that porch, she was beginning to understand that the partnership she believed in had not been what she thought it was. When Atsley came home that evening, Jane said nothing. She served dinner. She listened to him talk about the cabin progress. She went through the motions the way a person does when they're too hollowed out to do anything else. But she said something later that explained everything. She said it wasn't finding the messages that broke her. It was when he walked through that door and smiled at her like absolutely nothing had happened. That was when she understood he had been looking her in the eye and lying to her face for longer than she could even calculate. She confronted him. She showed him what she had found. He denied it. He deflected. And he told her she was reading too much into things. When she told him she had seen exactly what was written, his response was that she shouldn't have been looking at his phone. That was where the conversation ended. Jane pushed for counseling. Atsley attended a few sessions and then stopped. Jane said later that you cannot make someone fight for a marriage if they have already quietly decided to walk away from it. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She endured. She showed up for filming. She smiled on camera. She talked about their partnership and their homestead and their life together while carrying knowledge that made every single word a performance. The show had become her prison, and the image of a happy marriage was the lock on the door. The isolation was its own kind of suffering. One, she couldn't tell anyone in the Kilcher family what she knew. They were his family first. She couldn't tell the producers. The show's entire identity depended on the image they projected as a couple. She couldn't even reach out to most of her friends. How do you explain that you're living a lie without pulling the thread that unravels everything? So she carried it alone. Day after day, season after season, smile after smile, The toll was real and it was relentless. Jane began experiencing anxiety she had never felt before in her life. The woman who had faced down Alaska's most dangerous conditions, who had survived storms on waters that would destroy most people, found herself unable to sleep. Her mind ran through questions she couldn't answer. Had she missed signs earlier? How long had this been happening? Was she overreacting? She wasn't overreacting. She was surviving. But that kind of survival was wearing her down in ways the wilderness never had. By late 2022, she started spending more time away from the homestead. She joined Emily Riedel on Bering Sea Gold and found herself back on the water for the first time in years. Something shifted in her when she was out there. The version of herself she had set aside to become someone's wife started coming back. She was testing what it felt like to simply be Jane Kilcher, not Jane and Atsley Kilcher. What she discovered was that she was stronger alone than she had felt in a very long time. By 2023, she was spending significant stretches of time in Nome. She stopped mentioning Atsley in her posts. People noticed, they speculated, but they didn't know the half of it. What finally pushed Jane to speak publicly was learning that Atsley was planning to file himself. She could either wait for the news to land on her, or she could step forward and tell it on her own terms. Jane Kilcher had never been the kind of woman who sat and waited for life to happen to her. So she wrote the post, and the response was unlike anything she expected. Thousands of people reached out. Many of them shared their own stories, their own moments of discovering that the person they loved most had not been honest with them. Jane said later that she hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected that telling her truth would give other people the space to acknowledge theirs. But it did. And that was unexpectedly healing in a way she hadn't anticipated. August of 2023 brought another loss. Willow, her Alaskan Malamute, who had been with her for 12 years, passed away. That dog had been her constant companion through the darkest stretch of her life. It was another weight to carry. But Jane didn't break. By November, she posted a Halloween photo with a single-word caption. Single. It wasn't sad. It was defiant. It was the declaration of a woman who had decided she was done mourning something that had been over for a long time. Today, Jane Kilcher is building a life that looks nothing like the one she shared with Atsley. She's back on the water doing the work she was built for. She's no longer tied to a homestead that holds years of painful memories. She's no longer performing a role for cameras or for anyone else. The divorce has been finalized. She has been open about her journey. Atsley has remained largely quiet. And Jane has found that the commercial fishing identity she set aside all those years ago was waiting for her exactly where she left it. She said something that captures all of it perfectly. She said, "You cannot love someone enough to make them be honest with you." She spent years trying to hold together something that had already come apart at the seams long before she was ready to accept it. The discovery she made in that kitchen wasn't what ended her marriage. It was proof that her marriage had already ended. She just hadn't been told yet. Jane Kilcher spent years protecting a secret that was slowly eroding everything good inside her. She kept quiet to protect her family, her image, and a version of her life she had worked 2 decades to build. But the truth, as it always does, eventually demanded to be told. The woman telling it now is not bitter. She is not broken. She is someone who walked through one of the hardest experiences a person can face and came out the other side knowing exactly who she is and exactly what she is worth. She's back on the water. She's moving forward. And for the first time in a very long time, every